A warm welcome to the forum from the BBC, and from me, Bridget Kendall, and an international audience of social entrepreneurs here in Oxford. Yes, as you can hear, today we're at the annual Skoll World Forum, yes, another forum, to discuss heroism and risk in the emerging field of social entrepreneurs. These mavericks and risk takers, like all of you in front of me here in the audience, I guess, take bold ideas from the world of business and look for ways to improve the lives of many. So that sounds quite heroic, but what does it mean to be a hero today? And is the way that social entrepreneurs lead change similar to what heroes do? Well, to discuss all this with me is Larry Brilliant, doctor and social entrepreneur who helped eliminate smallpox, Ken Brecher, anthropologist, champion of libraries, and Roshaneh Zafar, social entrepreneur working in Pakistan. And to kick off, I want to ask all three of you, as far as heroes go, who's your favorite hero? Whether real or comic book or from the movies or mythical. Roshaneh, what about you?
Well, when I was 14, it was Indiana Jones. But as I grew maturer, I realized there was more to life than just a swashbuckling hero that I needed. So I guess in today's, why I do what I do, it's because of Dr. Yunus. And I really learned humility from him. And I think one of the attributes that heroes carry with them is the sense of knowing that they haven't got it all.
The guru of microfinance. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. What about you, Larry Brilliant?
It's a hard question to answer. There are so many heroes, but because I'm sitting next to Roshaneh Zafar, I will tell you about a young man named Zafar Hussain, who was the person who taught me about smallpox eradication. And he typifies heroism because he came from a poor village in Bhopal, and he left everything, his family, his meager income, to take a risk to try to eradicate smallpox from India. He put it all at stake to try to reach a noble goal. And for me, that's really an aspect of heroism that I most admire.
Okay.
And Zafar, by the way, means victory.
Very appropriate. And what about you, Ken Brecher?
I like those heroes who are full of human faults and hubris and problems. I think Iron Man is a wonderful hero, particularly in the films where he not only has the ability to do good, but he's also a bit of a mess himself.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because you of course know the film world very well, and I wonder, do you think it's easier for us to identify with mythical and movie heroes? I mean, both Roshaneh and Larry talked about real life heroes. What do you think?
I think it's very easy to identify with that, and I think it's one of the unifying things in our world. It's a positive thing that many people, I remember being with a group of colleagues and friends in the Middle East who were coming from a whole range of backgrounds and religions, and we were having a very hard time finding the common ground. And finally I asked, has everyone seen the film Little Miss Sunshine? And they all had. And I said, and did everyone find it funny? And they all had. And that was the beginning of our conversation. We had one thing in common at that moment, that we'd all loved the same film.
I suppose I was thinking the heroes of the moment surely must be those Japanese engineers and workers who've been risking high radiation doses to save their country from who knows what, nuclear holocaust, the nuclear samurai as they've been called. But coming back to you three, Larry Brilliant, if you take a quick glance at what you've done, it's pretty impressive. You're one of the 4 doctors on the United Nations team that ran the campaign to eradicate smallpox in South Asia. You launched the Sever Foundation, which has helped to give nearly 3 million blind people their sight back. You've run a host of successful companies, including Google's philanthropy arm, and you've been personal doctor to the Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia. And now you're president of the Skoll Global Threats Fund. Do you think that's enough to make you a hero?
No, that's enough to make me a mythological creature.
A sort of Iron Man.
Every time I read my autobiography online, it always begins by if his life were a movie they'd rejected from Hollywood. And it didn't feel that way living it, but reading it, it sounds quite absurd. I think that the real heroes, though, are the ones who enter into something with something to lose. And I have been lucky in my life in that I didn't have that much to lose. In smallpox eradication, I was able to go to villages that had thousands of children dying, but I was immunized. I had an American passport. I could leave. The real heroes are the hundreds of thousands of Indians who couldn't leave, weren't immunized, put their life at risk every moment. So the term heroism, we do ourselves, I guess it's a human characteristic to want to bring it all together to one person, but heroism is a much more complex, much more noble concept, I think.
Ken Brecher, you I can tell the audience have got things to say about that. We'll be coming to you in a minute. But Ken, I wanted to ask you, you've been an agent of change in many guises. You now run the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, the most diverse public library system in America. And for a decade, you challenged the movie industry by running the Sundance Institute in California. And you're an anthropologist, so you can look at all this from on high and take a long view, too, of these questions. But what do you think are the qualities of a hero? And are they the same qualities that are needed by social entrepreneurs? Larry said heroes are people who've got something to lose. What do you think about that?
I think there are many social entrepreneurs who are actually the personification of heroes. And by that I mean that they enter into a very difficult situation without much reward in sight. They usually have a very hard time explaining it to their families who find that they're away from home at the time they need them the most because the people they're serving or hoping to serve need them as well. I find that the hero social entrepreneur is really the person who's thinking of the moral question, the integrity, the issues, who doesn't sleep well at night because there are people who need opportunities that they don't have. And I think that's true in mythology too. You find people who rise to the occasion, who do something which you couldn't do yourself. It's always the question, could I have done that? And I have a young son who asked me the other day, when I told him I was coming to speak with my colleagues here about heroes, he said to me, well, there hasn't been a hero since the cavalry stopped riding horses. And this is a young man's view of a certain kind of heroism.
Yeah, it's not quite the same thing being in a 4x4 or a tank, is
No,
it?
I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
But you're talking about leadership qualities, aren't you? Rising to the occasion. What do you think, Roshaneh, Zafar? Do you think that heroes are leaders, or actually are they people who don't show leadership skills?
I think they're champions, actually, champions of a cause that, giving voice to a cause. And a lot of times when I think of social entrepreneurs, I think of people who don't take no for an answer. For example, my hero in real life is a client of mine, Shaheen, who took on men in the field of making auto parts. Her husband died, and she had two options. Either she could rely on the charity of her family members, or she could take on this business which was highly patriarchal and masculine in its environment. And she actually became more successful than her husband. And if you really go and meet her, she's a diminutive lady. She's about 4 feet 11 inches. But my God, is she a ball of fire. So for me, she is my hero because she's transforming society. She's changing lifestyles. And she's pushing the threshold of what is possible. And I think that's what a hero really embodies.
Yesterday we had an award ceremony here to award Archbishop Desmond Tutu with an award, the Treasure Award, the Skoll Treasure Award. And Mabel Van Orange was sitting over there. I said to her, she was the moderator for the panel, and as she was talking to him, he made her cry. He made her cry because of his nobility, because of his character, because of the history of what he gave to South Africa emerging from apartheid. She tried to hide the fact that she was dabbing her eyes with Kleenex. But he made her cry because he's a hero. Later that evening, he made us all cry. There are ephemeral characteristics that heroes have. He has it. We know he's a hero. We feel it inside.
I heard about this event with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and it's interesting because I understand that he said to all of you that you were fantastic people, that you were the cat's whiskers, right?
Yeah, he did.
He did.
Yeah.
So he was also saying that you entrepreneurs are heroes, and it's interesting, this idea of whether social entrepreneurs are groundbreaking heroes, because you gather at these conferences to inspire each other and maybe to feel a little bit good inside. But is it the case that social entrepreneurs to some extent are self-appointed heroes?
Could I come back to Desmond Tutu for just a moment? Because he did something yesterday that I thought was truly the role of a hero. When Peter Gabriel was singing that beautiful song about Biko, he stood up and danced. Yeah. And I thought, that's it. That's the key. Yeah. To be able to never lose the joy, to be able to see the truth of the world, but not be stopped from dancing in a moment of joy, a moment of both memory and joy, the loss of a great figure, a true hero, who gave his life, but also to feel the joy of the moment and not miss that.
But what about this praise that Desmond Tutu gave you?
Yeah, I think a holy person, a saint, recognizes in her or his parishioners that aspiration for nobility in God. And I think that's what he was doing. He was recognizing in his fellow activists the aspiration for a better world. And no one could get more honor than Desmond Tutu standing up in front of us and holding his arms in namaste and in greeting and saying that he saw something in each of us that could change the world.
And
Okay.
a true hero is inspirational. He inspires others, or she inspires others, and brings out the best in them. That's exactly what Desmond Tutu was doing.
Okay, well, let's come to you, the audience, to find out what you think. So many social entrepreneurs and influential thinkers among the audience here today. Are social entrepreneurs self-appointed heroes? Are these people who want to set themselves up to inspire others? Wait for the microphone, and please do say who you are and where you're from and what you do. And we're looking for comments, not questions. And can you please keep it brief? So, hands up. Anyone who's got something to say? Come on, you're not that modest. There's a gentleman at the front here. Where's the microphone? It's just coming down.
Thank you. Jim Burke from Participant Media. There's a lot of focus so far on this concept of heroes being this exalted, higher level being, and I think that for the people who are here or any of these types of gatherings, they don't come here to celebrate and feel good. They come here to amplify, and they come here to accelerate the work that they're doing. Because heroes don't ever really think about what they're doing as an end game to some higher level. And I think what Archbishop was doing yesterday as an audience member was acknowledging the commitment that these people have made, but not so much to place a crown on their head or for a group to gather together and talk about how wonderful they are. Everybody here is here to actually expand impact, at least from my perspective.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Jeff Skoll, and I'm glad everybody's here at the forum.
Thank you for making us part of your event.
Thank you. Well, at the Skoll Foundation, we actually have a tagline called "Uncommon Heroes, Common Good," and the reason we came up with this was we felt that in the world over time, many of the heroes that have been traditionally looked to for leadership have somewhat fallen, whether it's political leaders or athletes who've been kind of tainted by drug use or so on. And we looked around in the world and thought, who are the people that are truly doing the work that's so important to the future of humanity? And we found these incredible people, these social entrepreneurs, who put their lives on the line every day on the front lines to make a difference for the thousands or millions of people that they actually serve. And to us, that's the new form of hero in the world.
Can I just ask you, Jeff Skoll, though, if you're funding people like this, who are they or you accountable to? Who is it who decides the priorities? I mean, this is not an elected set of people who are answerable to a larger body of voters. Who decides which disease should be eradicated, which dragon to slay?
About 10 years ago, Sally Osberg, who's the CEO of the Skoll Foundation, and I had a meeting with a fellow named John Gardner. And John Gardner was the architect of the Great Society programs in the US in the 1960s. He was Lyndon Johnson's Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. And we asked him what we could do as philanthropists to best ensure the future of humanity. And he said to bet on good people doing good things. And that translated to our mission of investing in, connecting, and celebrating social entrepreneurs and their work. But really what he was saying was that there were cracks in society that weren't solved by business or government or the church or other institutions, and that somebody had to come in and find what these ills were in society and dedicate themselves to solving them. And that turned out to be the social entrepreneurs.
Okay, I'd just like to hear from other people. Jeff said it's about good people doing good things. But how do you decide if you're a good person and that you really are doing a good thing? Yes.
Thank you. Munqidh Mehyar, I'm from Jordan, director of Friends of the Earth Middle East. In fact, it's a very, very good question, Yani, how do you define a real hero in your area or in your region? I think a real hero is the one who finds himself standing alone in the beginning. Maybe a few supporters, but who does not have enough courage to get out and say that I support this person for this particular issue. And this is the pressure that he can or she can take from all the society, but they stand firm to their cause and they keep fighting for it. And gradually, after a year, 2, 3, people around him in the society, they find out that, hey, that guy is a real hero. He stood up to his beliefs and his beliefs are right. And we really need to do the change. And this is exactly what we need in the Middle East right now. And you see what's going on in the Middle East. It's Middle East under construction, I call it, because of a few heroes in a few countries that they got up and said, I want to do change. And those guys, even the one who started the Tahrir in Egypt and in Tunisia and now in Syria, Bahrain, and it's really going around, they were inspired by heroes from before who stood up and said, we do have an Israeli-Arab conflict. We need to stand up and talk about it and sit down on a table and discuss it. And there's a lot of issues around that needs to be discussed by somebody who is not afraid of the consequences, but the reality and what we put on the table. Thank you.
That's a fantastic comment. There's several hands going up. There's a couple of hands behind you.
Hi, I'm Alex Hoffman, founder of Changeants, play on change agents. We run a website called changeants.com, which is a open source storytelling and team building site for agents of social and environmental change. And we really focus on the charismatic individual and them telling their personal story on an ongoing basis. They are living an adventure, and we feel like revealing that story is the best way to reveal the heroism, and then allow the intellectually curious public to follow these stories, do their own investigation. They can make their own decisions whether these people are heroes or not. We're not trying to determine that. We're just trying to make their stories available and accessible and then let people decide.
So it's mavericks who put ideas out there, maybe loners at the start, and who get other people to join forces with them. Other comments? Yes, gentleman there.
Thank you. Michael Shapcott with the Wellesley Institute in Toronto, Canada. We work mainly in the area of housing and homelessness, and for us, the heroes that we work with are the people who are very much on the front lines. And for them, it's not about being entrepreneurs and engaging in solutions to homelessness is not about fame and fortune, but in many ways, it's the old expression, I think, came from Fannie Lou Hamer about being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And these are people who, rather than fall into despair and depression, actually see possibility and see solutions and are willing to engage in solutions. So for us, the heroes are the people that see possibilities and are able to realize those possibilities in the face of some really daunting odds.
Yes, a lady here.
My name is Kelly Whitney, and I'm with the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Technology. And I work with a lot of young students, and we bring in role models. And if you've ever seen Sally Ride or Carol Bartz or Maria Cliva swarmed by these young women, you know how important heroes are to them. And many of them I've had the pleasure to meet year after year, these young women. And they taught, when times get tough, when they have to make those really tough choices, they think, okay, so what would Maria do? Thank you.
Okay, it's interesting that you raised that women as role models, because I was wondering about the difference between men and women. And if you're a social entrepreneur, is it easier for a male social entrepreneur to display heroic qualities or not? Roshaneh, I wondered what you think. Do you think men and women lead change differently?
I think certainly there are masculine and feminine attributes to leadership per se. But I think if I look at it, there's a common thread that runs through both genders. When I got into this field, it was more a sense of outrage that plummeted me into this particular arena. I trained as an economist, and I went to business schools thinking I would make wealthy people wealthier. That was my ultimate objective. So a young man or a young woman would have that in the 90s when they were graduating. But with time, I realized that's not good enough. And I remember reading this book about misogyny, which was a science fiction. I'm an avid reader of science fiction. And that really, it just took it to its extreme, saying that there was a substance where the X chromosome was being killed, and the gender balance in society was changing very fast. And that's exactly what we are doing in South Asia. And therefore, I got into this field, and I work in the field of creating gender equity. So I don't personally think that it's really about a male or a female getting into this field, but it's really about the end objective and the end goal that we have in mind, which is to make a peaceful, prosperous, and equitable society.
Larry, what do you think?
I've had the privilege of sitting in front of Mother Teresa and the Dalai Lama, so I can use two uncommon examples of a male and female social entrepreneur, hero, if you will. And what's common is that sitting in front of either one of them, you reach inside of yourself, you try to find that which is the best in you, and you try to bring it out and make it the day's work every day, reflecting on it. That's a tremendous kind of heroism. I think it's gender neutral. They both serve people. You might say the Dalai Lama serves people in a way that others might not consider masculine, and Mother Teresa was more aggressive than you might consider. I don't think those are the issues. I think the issue is that a real hero, when you're sitting in front of them or contemplating their life's work, you are inspired to be greater and better than you ever could be.
Larry, do you lead change in the same way as a woman would? Or do you think you do it in a different way?
I've been accused of leading change in a way that a woman does. They usually call it, in my case, because it's a man, they call it loose management.
Oh, that's interesting. Really? What does that mean?
I take umbrage to that.
The mind boggles.
Well, it means that I really believe in empowering the people around me. I try to choose people who are smarter than me. I try to create the facility where I get out of their way. I learned to manage from a woman, Nicole Grasset in the United Nations. And when we were all together working as a team, you'd be hard-pressed to find who actually had the title of CEO or the boss. And I quite like that form of management. It isn't the kind of management necessarily that's associated with a strong male archetype.
It's interesting, though, because if you think about myths that go so deep into our psyches, in myths and fairy tales, it is the men who kill the dragon, and it's the heroines who wait to be rescued. Ken, you're
not if you've seen Shrek.
Ken.
Someone said to me recently that behind every great man there is a surprised woman. Whenever we talk about the difference between heroes and heroines, I always think of this extraordinary figure that I met in the Sudan called the Ustaz Mahmoud Mohammed Taha, who was a person, the head of the Republican Brotherhood there, who was murdered, hanged in public for his belief in the equal rights of women, a new version of the Sharia, a second interpretation of the laws that came from Mecca. And I remember speaking with him on the desert outside of Omdurman, and he spoke about the impossibility of having a full life without the equal participation of men and women, and the importance of that. And I remember thinking at that moment that there were so many things that so many of us as Western men, or as a Western man myself, there was so much I had to learn in the developing world, and there was so much I had to learn from Islam. It was a very big moment for me, and I looked around him, and around him were his closest advisors, who were both men and women. But when it came time to kill the head of his movement, it was the man who was killed, because they perceived him to be the leader of it, although he was sharing that leadership.
Well, let's get a bit more from the audience, because this is about perceptions of leadership as well as leadership. Do men and women lead change differently? There's a hand right at the back.
Hi, I'm Cameron Elahian with Global Catalyst Foundation, and I'm one of those lucky men who stands behind an amazing woman who is my hero, my wife. And I challenge any man in this room or anywhere to go and do what she does. She has been always on the front line in Afghanistan, in Darfur, in Pakistan, in Iran, in everywhere there has been a disaster. So I don't believe that you can really separate heroism. It runs in all bloods.
So the message that you're giving us is that social entrepreneurs as a class, as a community, have managed to overturn old stereotypes. And it definitely isn't the men who just slay the dragon anymore. Is that completely true? There's a lady at the front who wanted to say something.
She can certainly slay a dragon. I know that.
Not the way you are doing.
Hello, my name's...
I'll come to you in a minute. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. It's a brilliant session, and I'm so happy to be here.
Can you tell us who you are?
My name is Kuratulan Bakhtiari, and I'm from Pakistan. I work in Balochistan with the communities in very traditional societies. As a woman, the question is, there's definitely, I see a difference. As a woman, I can't make a distinction between personal and professional. And for me, the experience I had to go through as a mother, it has always divided me, and it has put me in a situation continuously, the priorities all the time, and yet to make the things happen. I was put in a situation where I had to make a choice that either you leave the home and your children, will keep your children if you want to continue your community work. And one night I had to stay up to make that decision. And the next morning I said, I have to leave the home and continue what I'm doing. My youngest was 6 years old. And that's the kind of choices I have always been coming against, to keep doing what I believe in doing. So it's very, very, very complex, or maybe it is complex from where I come from.
But if you're working in Balochistan, do you have a dilemma as a woman wanting to act as a social entrepreneur, lead change, about perception of leadership, perception that maybe it should be men who show more leadership?
No, I think it can be anyone. And anyone who can overcome his or her own internal fears and is able to detect fears in others, as obstacles in others' lives.
Thank you. There's a lady behind you who had something to say too.
Hello, my name's Hilary Sutcliffe from a technology think tank called Matter. When, on the first day of the forum, we had this sort of speed dating session where there was about a line of 30 people and then another line of 30 people parallel, and we had 3 minutes to give our spiel. What's good about you? What did you get into this arena for? And what was fascinating to me was everybody really, in some way or another, said, I thought somebody should do something about this, and in other areas of my life, it's usually, and someone should, and whine. But everybody here said, and so I did. It was personally saying, somebody should do something, so I'm going to do something about it. And I thought that was a distinctive, and that was men and women, and in that sort of 40 people I think I met in that arena.
That's great. Any men? Got anything to add here?
Just say women are great. Men are okay? Okay, I agree.
Yes, my name is Razik Fahim, and I came from the same region, Balochistan, from Pakistan. And I work with Kuratulan from last 15 years almost. And yeah, on the style of leadership, I realized that people like me, men, who have been grown up in an extremely conservative society, kills half of his being, the feminine part of ourselves. So I think it is extremely essential to reclaim your humanity. You won't be able to contribute in the lives of others until you did not reclaim your own being, the feminine being. And while working with young people in the extremely difficult situation, I always remind that what Kuratulan has been doing in this kind of situation. And when I realize her style, I just do the same, and I just observe the extreme breakthroughs that I made. Because of that, whole sense of my being, I think it won't be able for men to make great breakthroughs until he reclaimed the feminine attributes that God bestowed on him as human being.
Thank you very much. I realize that I stand corrected here. I shouldn't have introduced the discussion as being about just heroes, but definitely heroines and heroes. Yeah? Well, we've got lots more to talk about. There's more of the programme to come. And you can join our discussion on facebook.com/BBC Forum. But now, a small break for the latest world news from the BBC. We'll be back in a few minutes. That's great, everyone. Of course, there isn't really a summary of world news at the minute. There will be in a minute. We'll carry on with the programme in a minute. But if you were to hear this on the radio, you would indeed have an upsum of what's happening in the world.
Is this where we get our red noses for April Fool's Day?
Well, we should have had red noses, shouldn't we? And Emily's telling me to tell you all to misbehave a bit more. You're being far too well behaved up here on the platform.
Only knew who she was saying that to.
Who knows what will happen now? Okay, we're ready to carry on. Hello, I'm Bridget Kendall. Welcome back to our special forum programme from the Skoll World Forum in Oxford University, in front of a crowded hall of social entrepreneurs. And with me here, three global leaders of change: librarian supremo Ken Brecher, social activist Roshaneh Zafar, and doctor and social entrepreneur Larry Brilliant. We've been looking at the qualities of social entrepreneurs and whether or not they're heroes and heroines, what it means to stand out from the rest of us and push for new solutions to improve people's lives. Let's look a bit more at the challenges they face, and particularly the challenge of risk. Now, Larry Brilliant, you're president of the Skoll Global Threats Fund, which gives money, hundreds of millions of dollars, to help counter the major threats of our age. And you, at least you hope so, yeah? And you argue that to be able to live in this uncertain world, everyone, including social entrepreneurs, needs to be more risk literate, to become better at making decisions in uncertain conditions. What does it mean to be more risk literate?
You know, I think 30, 40 years ago, the world faced almost a single existential risk. 50,000 nuclear weapons the Soviet Union and the US had pointed at each other, the fear of nuclear holocaust. Now, with increasing population, decreasing resources, increasing climate change, which is a great exacerbator, looking at shortages of water, continuing nuclear proliferation, regional conflicts, and increasing probability of pandemics, and a whole long list of others, humanity faces many existential risks. They're complex, they're difficult to quantify, they're difficult to talk about. Even when you list them, as I just did, they're mind-numbing. And we do not have the global governance, the democracy, the form of economic theory to understand those risks. Most importantly, the people who vote for change, who vote for leaders, frequently they vote against their own best interests because they are not aware of all the risks. So I think we do need a risk literacy. We need to change reading, writing, and arithmetic in our schools to reading, writing, arithmetic, and risk literacy.
So some of these risks are not new. Some are new, but they're not all. But what you're saying is that in the globalized world, they all cascade, they multiply.
That's exactly
correct.
That's
what we need to appreciate.
The risk of water shortage is not new, but the risk that it can cause a global crisis has been brought about by increasing population, changes in technology, transportation, and the media. You're exactly right. The change is that modernity and globalization, technology, and population pressures have changed local risks into global risks.
So social entrepreneurs, they're there to go out there and see new challenges. As one gentleman said to us, be the ones who are out in front, not yet supported by others. So they see risk. Are they risk literate enough?
They are. In fact, risk literacy is one of their great qualities. They understand the risks of inaction. And that, indeed, I think, is one of the hallmarks of a social entrepreneur. They understand that the risk of them not taking an action is greater than the risk that they face themselves. And they are willing to put themselves in a heroic mode to do something about that.
So it's not that they need to introspect and say we need to understand risk better. They need to be able to transfer to other people the understanding of this. It's about teaching risk. Roshaneh, do you think you can teach risk?
Well, if I look at the recent past, with the financial crisis, we were supposed to know financial risk, but we didn't. So I'm one of those proponents who believes you can't teach risk. If I give you my example, I hadn't really thought that I would set up a microfinance institution in Pakistan and nationalize it and go scale. If I had begun to think about it, I would have probably still be in my room thinking about it and not putting it into action. So I think the moment you begin to teach risk, you can understand risk, you can plan and mitigate risk, you can try to address risk, but I'm not sure if you can learn how to handle it, or learn about risk literacy. That's my take on it.
That's the dilemma then, Larry. How do you learn about it?
Well, I would disagree lovingly, of course. In retrospect, if you look at the 2008 financial crisis and if you model it, we see that the derivatives that were produced were 6 times the global GDP. That was a greater amount of leverage than we knew about. But far more important, one firm, Lehman Brothers, was responsible for 60% of all the derivative tradings. If we had known that and seen that, we would have realized this is a risk that is not acceptable. But because we don't have the tools or the vocabulary or the skills or the inclination, we didn't do that kind of a risk assessment. So I would disagree only in that I don't think we're there yet. I think risk is something that is so ephemeral and so difficult to capture that we have to find a way to make risk sexy.
Perhaps the answer is the Federal Reserve should have been headed by a woman, and then we won't.
We're all in the same. We're absolutely in the same. I'm with you.
A friendly shake of hands on that one. I wanted to bring you in, Ken Brecher, because you must be pretty used to juggling risk and challenging convention, particularly in the film world, massive risks that people have to take there. But I'm also thinking about your role as president of the Library Foundation in Los Angeles, because Larry's been saying to us we're living in a time of cascading risk. And surely this is a radical time, even a risky time for libraries, given the way that information is evolving. Mm-hmm. Do you think that librarians need to be more risk literate?
I think they're extremely risk literate. I think librarians are sort of unsung heroines and heroes. I was recently looking at the history of libraries as the head of the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. I don't run the public libraries, but I run a private foundation with a public purpose, which is the support of this large library system. And what I've discovered in getting to know librarians over the last year or so, and a large number of them, is that it's the age of the librarian who walked around going, shh, you're in a library. That's over. They love technology, they're gamers, they love books, they love ideas, they love information. And they're at the forefront of social justice. When the United States government asked the Library Association to provide them with information as to which books people were taking out and which websites they were looking at, and I should just mention we had 155 million visits to the website of the Los Angeles libraries last year. That's a lot of visits. When the government asked for that information, the librarians said no, absolutely not. This is not the information that we will ever provide. What a person reads online or in the book in their lap is their business, and it's private. There is no censorship, and we will never reveal that. The great risk, though, Bridget, the really great risk is that we'll create a kind of information elite. A large portion of the population of this huge city that I live in, Los Angeles, doesn't own a computer. And those that do have many have old-fashioned dial-up computers, and they don't have the bandwidth to get the information. It's impossible in that kind of city to graduate from high school if you can't get online and do. So our thousands of free computers turn out to be the lifeline and the education line for so many students. The risk is that we will separate the information and we'll link it to a certain kind of technology which will not be available to people who need that to prepare a resume or find a job or actually ask the questions that need to be asked at this moment if we're going to change or evolve our democracy.
I wanted to come to you in the audience about this. I can see some hands going up already because, as I said, we think of social entrepreneurs as being big risk takers, but I wondered if any of you had tough lessons to learn when it comes to dealing with risk. Yes, there's a lady there.
Hi, my name is Janet Wasserstein. I'm with MIT, the Office of Foundation Relations. And I'd just like people to remember the ideas and inspiration that come from the great universities around the world, the new technologies that come from the universities, G-Lab, D-Lab programs at MIT, and the students themselves that just don't go to Paris or Florence to look at the museums, but they actually go into countries and put themselves at great risk.
Okay, there's a gentleman here who had his hand up.
So I'm Ron Dembo from Zero Footprint. I absolutely believe you can teach risk. And in fact, I absolutely believe that one of the big problems we have in the world today is that the people who run our governments don't fundamentally understand how to make decisions under uncertainty. There's so many glaring examples of this, whether it's nuclear power or security at airports or whatever. There are simple ideas that can be conveyed to audiences of any kind that tell you more or less how to interpret the solution to a problem. And that's about as important as it is. For example, in a very, very risky world, an optimal solution is to hedge. And the question is not what the solution is, but how much to hedge. So for example, in today's world, you wouldn't say all nuclear or all solar or all wind, you would hedge. And in a world or problems that are deterministic or known with certainty, the optimal solution is to execute. And that distinction is not made. We treat all problems as if they were homogeneous. But the key is to separate out what is truly risky and what is truly known with certainty, and to treat them differently. The nature of the solution is different. And that's what you can teach. That's what you can actually teach.
Okay, great. Gentleman here at the front.
I'm Carl Pope from the Sierra Club, and I think an important distinction about risk is, are you putting your own skin at risk, or are you putting somebody else's? Social entrepreneurs, one of the ways you know you're doing something virtuous is when the risk is on your shoulders. But we're taught to worship leaders who put other people at risk, whether they're politicians sending other people to fight wars, or chief executives gambling with other people's money on Wall Street. And I think it's a very important characteristic of, are you taking the risk or are you offloading the risk? And we don't pay attention to that distinction.
Can I comment a little bit on that? Because Carl and I had the wonderful experience of working at the same time in the 70s in Bihar, India. And in that time, Carl, there were almost zero NGOs. Go back to the 1970s in India. These risk takers, social entrepreneurs, this public sector, this private sector that we talk about all the time, civil society, it didn't exist. If you wanted a job, you worked for government or a state-supported organization. There were one or two very large family-owned corporations, and that was it. This middle sector that now has 500,000 NGOs in India alone. This is 500,000 potential social entrepreneurs who are looking around, putting themselves at risk, putting their ideas at risk. It makes for a much different world and a much better world when you have so many people who don't have a structured life, who have these opportunities for risk and reward. And I think we can celebrate that change since you and I were in Bihar.
But isn't it also the case that if you are a social entrepreneur, I mean, look at us, here we all are in this lovely, very comfortable city of Oxford, coming from probably quite comfortable lives, that, as you mentioned, that it's fair enough to take a risk if you have the luxury of being rich. But if you're poor, living on $1 a day, can you afford to?
That's what you're seeing in India. That's what you're seeing in Pakistan. That's what you just saw in Tahrir Square. That's what's so wonderful, is there's something changing in the world where people at every level of society are taking risks because the world has become unsustainable. We all sense it's going in the wrong direction. And throughout society, at every level, people are willing to take risks and make a change.
I think they're taking daily risks. You know, every day is a risk for them. And the fact that they've managed it so well for centuries is something that we need to learn from and we need to acknowledge. You know, the women that we work with are living at $1 and $1.50 a day, and then they take out loans, which is, you know, the word of credit is taking out a risk, undertaking a financial risk. And the fact that they not only invest this in their businesses, they actually manage to pay it back. That in itself tells you how big a risk they're taking and how open they are to risk taking itself.
The whole idea of risk taking is about being prepared to do something where you might fail. I come back to the question I asked earlier. How many of you have had tough lessons to learn when it comes to risk?
I think if we were to ask everyone to spend today on $1, they wouldn't be able to do it. I often do that with my students. I tell them, here's 100 rupees. Go and spend the day on this. And take care of 5 children. manage your household budget, make sure you run your business at the same time. If somebody falls sick, you have to manage them. And if women can do that, I mean, I think that's a major lesson that we can derive from that.
No one's had an, oh, there's a hand up there, yes. Hold, wait for the microphone, please.
I'm Mark Plotkin, I'm with the Amazon Conservation Team. There's been a subtext here which I want to highlight because I think it's as important. Social entrepreneurs not only do, they inspire. And I think the second is as important as the first, because the importance of a Desmond Tutu or a Thomas Jefferson wasn't just that they freed their people, it's the inspiration they gave to people around the world. And tying this into this gender thing that you brought up, if you look at the early heroes in Western culture, they're all men. Ulysses, Leonidas, Hercules, that's all changed. So for me, this gender thing is a non-issue. I don't think there was anybody there last night who looked at Desmond Tutu and said, wow, a woman would have done a better job, right? And so we have created the space in our culture now where we have the right heroes. It used to be just military guys. It used to be just athletes. You know, who do you want your son to grow up to be? Michael Vick or Desmond Tutu? Who do you want your daughter to grow up to be? Madonna or Jane Goodall? So the fact that we don't think twice about having heroes who are men or women for the most part is a very, very positive thing. And many of the problems in the world, I think, come from the fact that we worship the wrong heroes for far too long. And that's one of the good news pieces that comes out of meetings like this.
Okay, thank you. There's a gentleman at the back with his hand up.
I'm Lauren Walters. I'm the founder and CEO of 2 Degrees Food, a one-for-one food company. As I listen to this, what strikes me is it's about telling stories about successful risk takers. That's the message of Tahrir Square, that the message of Tunisia, that once it was successful, that other people saw and felt that they could take risks. And it's how those ripples go out from successful risk takers or successful entrepreneurs that's really the message. It's the entrepreneur is really the vessel. They're the vehicle. We're all the vehicles, but it's the ripples that come out from us that's important.
So you all have to teach from your successes and keep quiet about the failures, right? No? There's someone.
My name is Skip from the Visayan Forum in the Philippines, and one basic lesson we've had about risk is when you risk, there are often times that you will fail. And in our case, for instance, we risked partnering with government in rescuing women and children against human trafficking. And we risked a lot of our eggs in one person who was the part of the immigration, and found out later that he was actually booking chartered flights for trafficking victims, trafficking 80 women in chartered planes, and he was our champion. So the reality is, when you take a risk with people and when you take a risk with different situations, it's possible that you're going to fail and the risk will not pay off. And I think that at that point, 2 things have to be done. First, you have to have a plan B. Like, okay, if this champion happens to be really corrupt, do we stick by this person or do we stick by our principles? And I feel like it's very important for you to know that whatever you risk, your principles are intact. Second, I feel like when you fail after risking a particular endeavor, then the next step really is to learn from the lessons of that risk and just find a better way and hope that it pays off. But the reality is it tends to fail sometimes.
Okay, Ken, you want to go in?
Hearing Kip speak, and he became a social entrepreneur at a very young age, it makes me think about this, the problem today for young people who are looking for role models. And I think there's a big confusion, and risk is a big part of that too, when the role model is not coming from literature, is coming from a certain kind of media presentation where the pre-processed hero has been given to you. You have a certain amount of time to present that person. You're going to see it on the internet, or you're going to see it on television, and that person doesn't have the fullness of their being. You see it in a segment. Usually the media will choose that person if they can speak a bit of English or if it's useful to them to be able to interview them.
Is that why I'm here?
That's not They don't very often will choose somebody who will immediately be able to tell their story or to represent a certain idea, but the complexity of that, the complexity of the risk is almost always left out. I think an earlier generation found their heroes and heroines from literature. They read about people that they wanted to be like. But now they're finding it in a very different kind of way, and my concern is that what's being presented to them is actually not what makes a hero a hero.
Cartoon characters instead of three-dimensional.
Absolutely, and you don't have to die to be a hero. In fact, the person who hangs in there, the mindfulness of the hero, the ability to hang in there and to do the work day after day, in a sense, is the real definition, as opposed to the person who stands up and gives their life to it.
Very briefly, Larry.
Well, I do want to say one thing about this moment here in Oxford at the Skoll World Forum. We're here celebrating not just the individual heroes, we're celebrating a field of heroism that is new on the stage at the scale that it is. So it's an opportunity for all the people listening to know it's now safe to be a hero, it's safe to be a social entrepreneur.
I just wanted to come back to the person, Roshaneh, who you said was your inspiring here at the beginning of the program, Muhammad Yunus, who's the guru of microfinance, because this is an area where there's been an enormous amount of risk involved, hasn't there? And they've been developing ideas about whether, once it was seen as the holy grail of development, giving people a way to help themselves, and now there's much more soul-searching about the ways, some of the ways it hasn't worked, that it's actually turned out to produce risks for some of the people on the ground that weren't thought about.
I think a lot of social entrepreneurs have to take their responsibility very seriously. And one of the things that we are learning as a sector, and I had talked about that earlier as well, as we have to talk about responsible finance, where we have transparent relationships with our clients, where the entire business of financial transactions is partnership-based. And we have to go back to the fundamentals of microfinance, which is what is the end goal in mind? The end goal in mind is to empower individuals, is to allow them to live their dreams and to engage with their aspirations. And that's really what we need to do. That's what one has learned. At the same time, what's happening in Bangladesh with Dr. Yunus, I think that's an outrage. It really is unacceptable the way he is being treated. So as another perspective on this is, how do we treat our heroes? Why, what we are also, as society, we also have ethics and values, and we also have beliefs and dreams that we need to stand by, and there are certain people that embody that, and we have to give them due respect. And I think that that's something that we need to really understand and stand up for.
Larry, brilliant. You've been someone who's been in a position to give money to fund projects as a purse holder for Google, and now in your position in Skoll. Are you convinced by the power of microfinance to combat poverty?
I'm convinced by the power of Muhammad Yunus. He's one of my heroes, and I absolutely agree. He is being victimized in a way that is unprecedented, unfortunate, and fair. And I think part of the problem is we aren't free to have a discussion of the pros and cons of microfinance, microcredit, microdebt, all these different instruments, and see where are they most applicable, what's the best way to use them, without that conversation becoming immediately ad hominem. And it's a very sad moment, I think, for me, because this is one of the great leaders, not just of microfinance, but of economic development. We should be celebrating his life. He should be here on stage, not being hounded the way he is.
Do you fund microfinance?
Well, our organization is pretty new. We're just getting started. We have not yet funded microfinance, but we're brand new. We're less than 18 months old.
It's interesting thinking about Dr. Yunus, who I also greatly admire, as a kind of mythic hero. If you look at the role of the hero, speaking as an anthropologist, it almost always happens that you have to be taken down. You have to be removed from your position. You have to be demoralized. You have to be, in many ways, everything that's happening to him you can find in myth. Many of the origin figures, the great figures, and I did my field work in the Amazon, in the Xingu region of the Amazon, so many of those great figures, like Dr. Yunus, who introduced new ideas, whether it's bringing light into the world or understanding the difference between men and women, which mythic heroes always help us do. Very often they have to pay the price for that. And if they survive or not is often the question of the myth. But what's happening to him seems to me directly out of the great classic myths of the world.
One should just explain here that Muhammad Yunus, who more or less invented microfinance, was given the Nobel Prize for it, has now found himself under fire in Bangladesh, where it all started, in an extraordinary turning of the circle from being put on a pedestal to finding himself in legal problems. And I guess that brings us back to where you started as Ken, with the idea that heroes need to be flawed as well as inspiring. Yeah?
Well, I think that's what makes them, actually in the end, it's what makes them heroes to us, because we can see ourselves in them. And nothing gives us greater, was it the Rochefoucauld, who said one of the great French maxims was that there is some pleasure in watching a friend fall off of a roof. There is some. That was in French. There is some part of us that sets these people up, and then gets some pleasure that they're also having trouble with their wife, or they're also spoiling their son, or they're also human in the way that they can stand up and have a true moral and extraordinarily courageous life, and at the same time deal with the issues that we all deal with, how to sustain a relationship, how to put food on the table, how to be sure that our life actually ends up meaning something rather than has one moment that crashes down.
So final question to you on the panel. If social entrepreneurs are partly there to lead and to inspire, how do they get their message across, whether it's about risk or about empowering people who aren't in such a good position, but being realistic about talking about both the successes and the failures? Larry?
Well, I think the transparency of what they do is the best lesson. And if you only show the good without the struggle and without the mistakes, you don't convey the entire lesson. And how they get the message out, I think, is one of the beauties of this whole notion that the Skoll Foundation does, which is to celebrate, not just to fund, but to celebrate these leaders and these social entrepreneurs.
But celebrate suggests you just talk about the good bits.
No, but I don't think they do. I think that when you talk about the lives of our leaders, just as when you talk about our policies and our government, if you don't have transparency, we lose more than half of the lesson.
Roshaneh?
I think I agree with what Larry said, that you have to put your vulnerabilities out there. We are not perfect. We don't intend to be perfect. But on the other hand, I also believe that we should never take no for an answer. We should always persist. There's always a solution out there that you can find. And you have to push the frontiers and the envelopes of change. How do you communicate? I think a lot of it comes from the ripple effect that somebody had mentioned earlier, of how we share both our failures and our successes. In fact, I have learned more from failures. And I remember when I was starting out, and I was 27 years old, worked with the World Bank for 4 years, met Dr. Yunus, completely bowled over by him, went to Bangladesh, came back, and I didn't know where to start. And I remember he said something to me, and it's something that has held, stayed with me forever, which was, if you make a mistake, it's okay. Tell the world it was Dr. Yunus's fault, not yours. And I think that kept me going. And I think that's what great heroes do.
Ken Brecher?
I think that the most important thing we need to think about in this whole range of who are our heroes and what is a heroine or a hero is that we have a responsibility to the next generations. They need to be our heroes. They're the ones who are actually, in many, many ways, they have the answers already. And very often it becomes, we forget to listen to those answers. I don't know a single poor person who doesn't know what they need to get out of poverty. Ask them. They don't need a multi-billion-dollar program. They know exactly what they need. Sometimes it's just transportation. Sometimes it's someone to take care of their children so they can come home late from work. And I think young people see that very, very clearly, and they'll be the first ones to tell us that we're making all sorts of mistakes, that we could do better.
Okay. Well, what a great discussion, and time to bring it to an end, I'm afraid. Many thanks to the three of you, Larry, brilliant, doctor and social entrepreneur, Ken Brecher, anthropologist and libraries champion, and Roshaneh Zafar, social entrepreneur in Pakistan, and our wonderful audience. And if you've more to add on heroes or anything else that you've heard on the programme, or want to find out more about our guests, do contact us via bbcworldservice.com/the forum, or tweet us at BBC The Forum. But for now, from me, Bridget Kendall, the Forum team, and everyone here in Oxford, thank you for joining us.